Let me give you my big perspective on Recon. When I first started learning, understanding, and doing Recon on different targets, I knew one thing that I always must do, and that is to write things down. That was the premise, and it was non negotiable. True professionals have a solid, well written methodology and don't just hack as the wind blows, so to speak. If you don't have a clear direction, you will always be moving chaotically all over the place. In some cases, that might work, but more often than not, it doesn't. With that in mind, I created a document for my Recon methodology. In that document, I laid out a template with all the steps that I'm going to follow when assessing a target. As days and months went by, the document expanded tremendously because I learned more and more techniques and tactics with my practice. If you're just new to security research and bug hunting, I highly recommend you do this yourself. Start up a new document, whether online or offline, but you'd better do both, and start writing down the tactics that I'm going to teach you here. Start it now. Okay, the title of this lesson is Recon is just the beginning, but it can be big. Let me explain this from the perspective of how I approach Recon as of this moment. But let me get back in time for a little bit. In the first days to weeks that I began learning Recon, I only had a few tools to work with. It was easy to keep them in my mind without having to write anything down. Recon was actually really simple. Do a subdomain enumeration with an automated tool, do some directory brute forcing, discover endpoints here and there, and that would be just about it. And of course, results were mediocre, to say the least. I barely discovered any vulnerabilities. However, months in my journey, my Recon methodology turned into dozens of pages of techniques, and sometimes it would take days to weeks for me to do Recon on a target, depending on the level of complexity of the target. For example, it can literally take weeks if the target has star subdomains in scope and it also has mobile applications. Android Recon and security research is something I enjoy tremendously as of recent. So going from something that was relatively simple and could be memorated, and from something that yielded mediocre results, Recon became something very extensive and complex, and more often than not, it yields really good results. The level of depth and the duration of the Recon. I get this question a lot on social media. So the level of depth is a measure of the complexity of the target as well as the assets in scope for the responsible disclosure program that we're talking about. This means that a small target with a few assets in scope can have a researcher spend hours to maybe 2 or 3 days doing Recon, while a large target with a lot of assets could have a researcher doing reconnaissance for weeks. Which leads me to another very important point. Recon can be a goal in of itself, or it can be just the beginning. It depends on what you want. So, for example, you can start doing Recon, develop your methodology from what I'm going to teach you, expand your methodology into something very complex, and then go and work on targets by only focusing on Recon. You can be a very successful researcher with a lot of reported vulnerabilities who only does Recon. Or you can learn and expand your Recon methodology and use it as a first step in a larger research methodology for a target. For example, you've completed Recon on a target and you've found multiple subdomains that you want to investigate further. One of the subdomains is a web application and you want to test it for specific OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. You proceed with your testing. In this case, Recon provided a better view of your targets, its assets and infrastructure, and it rewarded you with further attack vectors, such as testing the web application for common web vulnerabilities. In my personal case, Recon is just the beginning, even though I have a very extensive methodology and I really love doing Recon in of itself. However, I also like to test for access controls, authentication flaws, reverse engineering, testing mobile apps, and much more. I kind of have a methodology for each of these. What I want you to take away from this lesson is that Recon and the extent or the complexity of your Recon is a personal choice. Decide how you want to do it and then proceed further. Okay, now that you have a fairly good top-level perspective on reconnaissance, Let's start by discussing the multiple ways in which you can find programs to do security research and bug bounty hunting on.